All right, hello and welcome to the EPPP Coaching Circle. I'm Dr. Jordan, joined today also by Dr. Aaliyah, co-facilitator of the EPPP Coaching Circle. And we have a very special guest speaker today, Veronica. Is it Poore? Is that how you pronounce your last name?
It
Veronica
is.
Poore. I just always assumed that's how it's pronounced, but I should verify. Who has been a longtime member of the EPPP Coaching Circle and has passed the EPPP and has come back to share her story, her journey, any advice that she has, and to answer questions as well. So I will pass the mic over to Veronica.
Wonderful. Hello. Welcome. And I'm hoping it's okay, but I'm really planning on being pretty informal. I think it's more important to just kind of share my journey and some of the things I went through, but also, to kind of feed whatever strategies I used, even if it's just to give you some ideas or things to think about. I know for me, I took so much from other people, and I feel like that was the only reason why I kind of got to where I am. So, um, in start, my journey was very long. It was nearly 5 years. I graduated in 2015 with my doctorate of psychology. And I'm in Arizona. So I think paying attention to what your state is and what the requirements are is a really big component, because knowing how many attempts you can take, what processes you have to go through, what the requirements are is a really big stressor, I think, that feeds into, getting to where you actually take the exam. And so I originally applied in 2016, which was, not too long after I graduated, because I had several coworkers and classmates that were like, you probably should take it pretty soon after you're done with school, because trust me, you lose a lot of this information. So I had every intention of trying to, take my exam as soon as possible, but I have never been a good test taker, especially multiple choice. And so a lot of my delays in my first attempt were fear, and I'm not a good test taker, and this really scares me. And I had some similar issues for previous exams. Like I had an exam for school psychology. We call it the praxis. And it was kind of that same thing. I had to take it multiple times, and it was like what I practiced. It's what I was trained in. It's what I knew. But for whatever reason, those multiple choice tests were just super difficult for me. And I'm sure a lot of it's second guessing and not feeling confident and questioning, what are they actually asking you? So all of those things I think played into my delays. But I did take a shot in the dark, I waited until 2018 for my first attempt. So I took my first attempt, and I'll be honest, I was so nervous. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had only kind of heard what it was. I had really no clue where to study or who to talk to. All of my friends had already long graduated and taken the exam. So like I didn't really have anybody that I could connect with. And so I took a shot in the dark, and it was terrible. I mean, I bombed it. There's no nice way in saying it. It was not a good attempt. And I just really didn't know what to do. So after that, I kind of talked with some of my classmates that had also taken and passed the exam. And I'm like, well, what did you use? What were some materials? And so I kind of ended up getting some hand-me-down old AATBS workbooks and fill in the blanks and some flashcards. I tried to make my own flashcards based on kind of the materials I was given, but I felt incredibly overwhelmed. It's a lot of information, and a lot of it wasn't my expertise. Like you're being asked questions on realms of psychology that we're not trained in. We don't have practice in. And so realizing that, it just became even more of that. You just have this overwhelming amount of fear. Like, oh my gosh, what am I even doing? Do I even belong in this field? How am I supposed to know all this stuff? Where do I even start? So, and I felt very isolated, you know, like I said, I didn't have a study partner. I didn't have somebody to kind of go on that journey with me. And so it just was very daunting. So almost an entire year later, some of that was my state's processing, but I attempted again. So in 2019, about 10 or 11 months later, I attempted again. I did make a vast improvement. I went from a 288, which was pretty low, all the way up to a 380. And so I was like, okay, I'm like, well, I'm like, that's still really horrible. I'm like, it's not even close to where I need to be. And I just, it was demoralizing. It was not a fun journey. It was really stressful. And I just didn't feel good about this exam at all. I just felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And so I kind of delayed, dragged my feet, and of all people, my husband, because he's like, we got to find you ways to like get over this hump. Like, I know you're struggling. I can tell this is incredibly stressful for you. What can we do? You know, so he's digging on the internet, trying to look at Facebook, trying to find any kind of resource whatsoever. And he came across Dr. Jordan's coaching circle. And he's like, I really think you should give this a try. It sounds like a lot of other people struggle with this exam. You know, maybe this would help you. Maybe just connecting with other people that are kind of also going through this journey can just kind of open some doors. And you never know. Maybe you'll find some good study materials. Maybe you'll find some good resources. And sure enough, I joined the group. It was last summer. So probably about June, I think, of 2020. So again, long gap in between attempts. You know, almost another year and a couple months later. And that this group for me was a really big eye opener. I was really internalizing this exam. I was like, oh my gosh, it's me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a failure. You know, just those really harsh things that we kind of go through, especially if you're attempting multiple times with this exam. And so finding this coaching circle, it made me realize that I was not alone. Lots of people struggle with this exam. And that was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Other people are having challenges. Other people are struggling with what this exam is all about and why these questions are so difficult. Even though we are practicing, we're experts. We have gone to school, we have graduated, we know what we're talking about, and we are usually very good at what we do. But yet for some reason this exam kind of comes in, and you like all of those thoughts that you have about yourself and your expertise kind of go out the window. And so it was an awesome way to vent about your frustrations about the exam. It was a very good way to just connect with other people also going through the journey. You know, Dr. Jordan did quite a few didactics where, you know, she was kind of going through some of these really difficult content domains. And so just even hearing like ways to help you remember some of the content, or, you know, little strategies here and there to kind of bring it together or bring to light, you know, an experience that you've had, and associating it with some of these concepts, I think was really big for me. So it was kind of almost bringing me back to the classroom, but like a lot more interactive and a lot more just a lot more like a lot less stressful, I can say. And so that was a huge help. And then in coming to the coaching circle, I also realized, oh my gosh, there are other resources out there. And again, you know, I know for some people, AATBS was amazing. It got them there. Psych prep, I know, is another good one. I think you kind of have to use whatever works for you. I got introduced to PrepJet. I had kind of heard, you know, just looking at, you know, what other people are saying about the materials. I heard that it was the most up to date. I liked it for me because the language wasn't so overwhelming. It was kind of like clear cut. It was a way that you could understand it, and it was concise. So for me, it ended up being very easy. So I also, at that time, over the summer of 2020, joined PrepJet. So I was kind of doing this simultaneous. I was having the coaching circle a couple times a month, and then I was also utilizing PrepJet. And what I started to do with PrepJet is that I kind of started organizing my materials in a way that I felt worked for me. And that was the other thing. Like, I would hear ideas and I'm like, I just don't know if that's for me. And I'm like, how can I tweak it in a way to where it will work? And so for me, I'm kind of that, I'm a sticky note person. I'm a notes person. I do a lot of things handwritten, only because for me, I felt like that was the best way that I could remember a lot of this knowledge. I started using color coordinated notebooks. So for each major domain, I actually would write my notes, like blue was my IO, pink was my lifespan, like, and I just kind of associated those colors with my note taking. And then and at first I wrote a ton of notes. Like for me, it's almost like I had to get it all down. I had to have a lot of information. And then I noticed that as I progressed through my studying, like I would condense it. And then I'd started to go, okay, well, what do I know? Like, let's bullet point these notes. Let's start to, so I kind of narrowed it down until I'm like, okay, if I see this term, what am I associating with? What am I associating it with? Or who am I associating it with? Theorist comes to mind when I say these, 3, 4, 5 terms. And so that's kind of how I utilized my own notes. The other thing I started to do is I started to make myself some charts. And so I think that for me visually, it really became kind of that bringing together those concepts. I created a huge brain. I literally labeled out all the parts of the brain. I did like little like web charts, those old school spider web, where you have the main point and then you branch it out to all the things. I did that for the neurotransmitters. I did that for certain theories like Bronfenbrenner's, like I would start to come up with sayings or mnemonics. I started doing other things kind of outside of just those bulk notes. And part of that was because that was my journey of really like saying, okay, how much of this am I actually retaining? How much of this am I actually like holding on to? And so I really started noticing that I was kind of progressing through my materials to where it could just kind of stick in there. And then I finally got approval. It took 9 months. So my state was very, very delayed with COVID. And I ended up taking my third attempt on May 5th of 2021. So this year, I did not pass. And I was very close. I got a 464, I think, or something close to that, 462. It was kind of in that range. So again, from 380, it was a very huge increase. And obviously I was telling myself like, oh my gosh, I'm close. My materials are working. What I'm doing is working. But the one thing I did notice on that third attempt is that before I walked into that test room, I was so nervous. I was so anxious. I was incredibly overwhelmed. I had this pit in my stomach. I probably felt like I was going to vomit, at least for the first 30 minutes. And the unfortunate thing is that I noticed right away, probably within the first 10 or 15 questions of that third attempt, that I was like, oh my God, I don't recognize these questions. Oh my gosh, I don't know this stuff. And immediately I panicked. I know I did. I panicked. I kept going through. I was like a deer in a headlight. Like I was so stressed and I was like, oh my God, I don't know. I'm so overwhelmed, but I kept going. I kept going. And I mean, I was close, so when I walked away from that exam, I was heartbroken. There's no, easy way. Like when you're on your third attempt, you're just like, really, oh my God, I have to go through this again. I have to go through all this processing. I have to go through all this waiting. Am I going to wait another year? You know, those were all the thoughts kind of rushing through my head as I did not pass, you know. And then the other thought of me is like, oh my God, I've tried all these things and this didn't work. You know, why didn't this work? But the two things that I can honestly say, once my emotional brain kind of left, because it took a couple of weeks, like I was really, really upset. And I just was so sad that I didn't make it. I was really hoping and praying that I was going to. But the two things that I realized that I was struggling with is I kind of got in my own way. I was so anxious and I was so nervous that, you know, when we start to really dive into the brain and understand how our brain works, if you're on anything emotional, if your emotions are too high, or if you're too upset or too stressed or too, you know, all of those things come into play. And really, our executive brain, our frontal lobes, they're not kicking in. They're not planning. They're not organizing. They're not helping with those components that we need. And so I was like, I literally remember telling my husband after, you know, all my tears, I'm like, I felt like I got in my own way. Like I really felt like it was something in me that got in my own way from getting to where I needed to be. And a lot of that was that letting that fear and that anxiety and that stress and that nervousness, all of those things, it's like it shut off my thinking brain. Like, and that's what it felt like. And the other thing I was kind of also realizing is that I was struggling with just test taking in general. I haven't been a good test taker. I kind of have the history of not being a good test taker. But I also don't think I was taking the right approach to questions. Like it was almost like I was banking on that I would recognize something and then the answer would just come to me. And I was realizing that I don't think that was going to work. And so the two things that I kind of set out to do after that third attempt was I was like, okay, I need to work on these two things. I need to work on test taking and I need to work on controlling my fear and my anxiety, because that's a huge part of this. And what was also coming with that anxiety was a lot of self-doubt, a lot of second guessing, a lot of, oh my gosh, I don't know this, I'm in a panic, you know, all of those things were coming into play. And then I was immediately kind of going into that failure mentality. Like, you don't know this, so, you know, like you're basically like, this isn't going to happen. And so the two things that I decided, I kept up with Dr. Jordan, I kept up with PrepJet, but the other things that I tried to incorporate, and I told myself I was going to do these things before my next attempt, whenever that may be, that I'm going to try to get a peer group, like a peer study group, where we can actually go through materials together and kind of talk about what we know, kind of come together. And then the other thing that I wanted to do in that peer group was I wanted to actually go through questions and hear other people's rationale of those questions. So it's like when you're looking at that question, like, well, why would you answer A versus B? Or this is kind of why I was thinking B versus C. And so I think that for me was also really helpful, because it kind of got you to like really explain, like, why are we going this route? What was the question that you think was answered? Because maybe I'm interpreting it a little differently. And so I started to do that about once a week. And I took on another didactic group. I took on one that kind of, he went through, so it was Dr. Steve Heron. And what he did is that he actually, like, so he would pick a topic, but then he would kind of intertwine like how it related to other topics. So it was more of like that association. And so hearing it a little differently, I think, was just kind of another like puzzle piece. Like it was more like, okay, well, maybe if I hear it a little differently, it might kind of work for me. And so I started doing that. And then I actually took on a service called Preppy. And that was solely to focus on test taking. And so I took on that coaching. And it really helped me kind of logically look at questions. It actually was not geared at all towards content. So there was no content review. Like it wasn't anything related to the content. It was how do you approach questions? What are they actually asking you? How do we get to what they're actually asking you? And then how do we logically go through to rule out answers? And so I had never really learned how to do that. So for me, it kind of took my emotional brain out of the equation and made it a logical process that you go through step by step and that you really slow down, hear what the questions are asking, figure out like what is this really related to, and then kind of narrowing down through steps. And so I felt like that was good for me to kind of take on as a different approach because it was so different from didactics. I re-reviewed all of Dr. Jordan's videos. Like I was going through those and like making sure I'm like, okay, do I remember these? And is this something new? Is this something different than what so for me, I was like, I'm taking everything on. Like there was no shortage to what I was going to do for this last attempt. The other thing that I took on, and it was more personal, but I took on some coaching with Dr. Alyssa Cohen. And we really honed in on my anxiety related to this test. She was amazing. I absolutely love her energy. But really quickly, we figured out like what's happening when we come up with this test. And so we worked on more of those self strategies to how can I boost my esteem, like my self-esteem? How can I kind of get rid of some of this self-doubt? How can I really be positive and change my mindset related to this exam? Because I think for me, the mindset was a really big component and a really negative component in regards to this exam. Like I had a lot of negative things to say about this exam. And I was kind of realizing that I wasn't even remotely being positive. And so I kind of had to really do some shifting and really engage in a lot more positive self-talk, a lot more, boosting myself up, but also saying like, you know what, all of this stuff related to this EPPP is not going to interfere with how I do these, how I approach this exam. And so, so I really started honing in on all of these little things. And I took on a lot of resources, and I know a lot of people can't do that. Sometimes it's a pick and choose. Sometimes they don't have the time or the schedule to take all that on. I was very fortunate. I actually, after my third attempt, I quit my job, which was really risky, but I was like, this has to be my focus. Because right now, taking on a full-time job, dealing with all the stressors, dealing with a crazy schedule, running around, lack of sleep, all of those things were coming into play. And I was realizing that for me, like I needed to put my focus on this. And so I took a big risk. I did all these things. And the other thing that I also started to realize is that there were certain topics and certain domains that I hated studying. And usually those are the ones that I struggled with the most. So I started to like figure out that I'm like, clinical for me was hard. IO was one of the worst. I mean, nobody studies IO and it's boring and nobody knows any of those theorists. But for me, I was like, okay, I may enjoy physio and psychopharmacology and all those, the fun brain stuff, but IO is where I'm struggling. So guess what I need to do? I need to focus on those content and those domains that are not so fun. I need to make sure that I'm understanding that language. The other thing that I did too is I started creating a vocabulary list for myself because one thing we know with this exam is there is a ton of vocabulary. And even though we are all highly educated, and even though we all have all of this expert knowledge, there's a lot of vocabulary words I've never seen in my life. Never. So I started, like, when I came across words that I was like, I don't even know what that means. So how am I supposed to know what that question's even asking me? Because I don't even know what that means. And so I started to kind of create myself a running vocabulary list. So where if I ever ran into those questions, like, I wasn't second guessing myself on what those questions meant. And that was a huge help too. So that was my journey. And then I retook for my 4th attempt on September 8th, and I passed. I passed with flying colors. I went from a 264 or 262 or whatever my score was, all the way up to a 567. So I increased by over 100 points. It was a huge jump. And it was the best feeling in the world. It was shock because I couldn't believe it. But it's just, I mean, you're on cloud 9 when that happens. And I think for me, the approach that I took, so I was nervous. You can't not be nervous with this exam, especially if you've taken it a couple of times. There are nerves. But I literally walked in there and I'm like, I'm going to own this. I am passing this. For the entire month leading up to this exam, this last attempt, I literally every day, sometimes multiple times a day, I told myself, you are going to pass this. You are passing this. You know what you're doing. You're an expert. Like, I had all of these really personal sayings for me. Like, I created a mantra. I created some positive comments that I was going to tell myself. And I literally told myself these things every single day. And towards the end, I was like, multiple times, I'm like, let's go through them. We're going to say it to ourselves. And it was almost like I built that mindset up to where I was going to believe it. And I think that was a huge factor and a huge difference in the way I approached this exam. And so when I went in there, I went through the first, 5 to 15 questions, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I know these questions, like, I can do this. Like, it was such a different feeling from even the most recent attempt. And not even that short, a couple months, after, really 4 months after. And I think by me having that really positive mindset and that really, just, I'm going to do this. Nothing is going to get in my way. I'm not going to let my fear or my anxiousness or any of these things, like, I know what I'm doing. I've studied. I know the material. I'm an expert, and I had to believe it. And I told myself enough times to where it happened. And so I just know that there were a lot of moving parts. There were so many individuals that helped me. This was not like a one-man show. Like, I needed all of these people. I needed all of these individuals. I needed that support system. I had people believing in me. I kind of wasn't believing in myself. And so to build that up and to go through this journey, it was tough, and it was just such a rocky road. But I also know that I realized each attempt that there were things that I needed to work on. And so I may not have really changed a lot of my approach, but I started to add to it. I started to adjust it. I started to realize, like, where are my weaknesses? What do I really need to focus on? What am I struggling with? And it took me a long time. It took me a long time to come to that. But once it did come together, in the end, we're the only ones that can do this. Unfortunately, no one else can do it for us. And so I started to realize, like, okay, I have to be working on myself essentially, but, like, in a totally different way than, you know, we would try to tell our clients. You know, we talk to our clients all the time about like, what do we need to do a little differently? What do we need to adjust? What do we need? You know, what are some strategies that we can use? And for me, it just wasn't one approach. Like I had to use many different approaches, and focus on many different things. And in each attempt, I tried to make adjustments. But in the end, like it just, it's awesome. And I feel like for others that are struggling with it, like you have to believe that you can do it. You just have to, like, it will come together, it will work, but you also have to be willing to do the work to do it too, you know. And what adjustments are, they have to fit your style. They can't just be a one size fit all. All of the programs out there are great and they work for many different people, and that's why. But you have to find what works for you, and it has to be your journey. It has to be, you know, it just really has to fall on you. But I think if you can really change that mindset and focus on what you need and focus on what you know will work for you, I mean, I really think that everybody's capable of doing it. It's just, you know, figuring that out and kind of going through that journey. So that was my long journey. 4.5, almost 5 years later. Oh, it was tough.
Thank you so much for sharing. It really has been a long journey.
It has.
I think
Very long.
it's one of the reasons I was so excited for you to share, because I knew
Yeah.
that, like I knew
Yeah.
that about you.
But everybody can do it. I know they can. It just, you know, and if they're, again, like, I mean, I want to open it up if anybody has any questions on specifics. And again, like, I don't, you know, when I try to share, I'm not like, oh yeah, you have to use these things. No, 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 no. You have to work, you have to go with, you know, what your gut tells you feels right for you. These were just all the individuals that really kind of had essential key, you know, they were key to my journey. They were, you know, and each one kind of gave me something a little different, but I know I needed them in each way. Like it, you know, each way I utilized them a little differently, but like they did really come into helping me get there. So, you know, definitely don't feel like I'm like, oh yeah, definitely go through here. You know, you got to use what works for you. And sometimes we try things and we're like, oh, that is not my style. That's not for me. And that's okay. But for me, I think each resource and tool that I used was because they each kind of provided me something different. And I needed that.
So I'm somewhat familiar with Preppy. Obviously, I know Dr. Alyssa Cohen. She's been a guest speaker in the coaching circle in the past.
Yes.
The other individual you mentioned that did the like integrative didactics, you said Steve Heron. Can you spell?
Yeah, Dr. Steve Heron. I think he does them on a weekly basis. He usually does them on the weekends. And he'll kind of just pick a topic, and then he likes to utilize like more of those real life scenarios or experiences, but he kind of would like tie in like, oh, you kind of you know, you'll probably recognize this specific topic because it relates to this theorist over here. And so you kind of notice like he would almost intertwine. But I think it was just, you know, again, just kind of different approach. It wasn't more like I know this coaching circle is a lot more like, hey, let's kind of figure out where your journey is. Let's talk about it. Let's open it up. Like it was more like group oriented. And so it's definitely a different approach. But yes, Dr. Steve Heron.
The EPPP prep doc. That's him. Interesting. I want to invite him as a guest speaker.
And he has his own journey. You know, he had his own journey, and I think sometimes, you know, it kind of speaks volumes when others have kind of struggled, or, you know, like their approaches are a little different. You know, and again, I think for me, hearing everybody's stories was so huge. You know, just I liked hearing people's, not that we want to hear people struggle, but like when you do see that others are struggling, you can relate to them. You can understand like, man, this was hard for me. Oh, I'm glad to see that somebody else wasn't also struggling with family therapies or, whatever it was. And so again, it was just kind of that added component for me.
And I love how you really did utilize so many different resources and individuals and materials and strategies. It really was a comprehensive whole person approach, right? Like we would do for our clients to get you to the finish line.
Yes. Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
I can see we had at least one other member pop on while we were talking. I can't tell who calling user 2 is. I see Carl has joined us. For any of you who are on and current members, do you have any questions for Veronica? Seems like someone's trying to talk. Whoever call-in user 2 is, if you're not able to share your mic, you can type a question in the chat and then I can read it. Carolina, do you have any questions for Veronica?
No, thank you.
Okay, and Carl, hi. Hi, and how are you? And do you have any questions? Oh, Carl is the call-in user. Oh, you're on here twice. Got it. Is that your pass letter? I'm not zoomed into you. Wait, hold on. Change layout. Grid. Is it a pass? I can't see it big enough, but that's what I'm looking at.
It's a pass.
It's a pass.
So I walked out the room and I looked at the front lady and I go, so 1 paper, 2 paper.
1 paper, 2 paper. You got 1 paper. Fantastic. Oh, did I mute the wrong one? Hold on.
No, so I'm super happy.
When did you take it?
Today, right?
Just today.
Today?
Yeah, I finished at 3:30.
That's
so 20
awesome.
minutes ago.
That's amazing, Carl. Yay.
So I drove over like 3 people and I drove really fast home to get people out of my way because I'm like, I have too much energy. Get out of my way, people.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited.
Yay, Carl. I know you had multiple attempts too.
Yeah, this was try number 5, so I was happy.
Oh, awesome.
Yay. I remember last time we met, I was like, you're welcome to join us. Either come on to share that you celebrated or to commiserate or whatever, which you join us either way. So great. Fantastic.
Carl, I'm glad you joined. I was thinking of you as we started this, and so yes, just so happy for you, and yeah, great that we can all be here to celebrate.
Yeah, very much. I'm happy.
That's awesome.
Celebrating. Veronica, how did you celebrate? Carl, how will you be celebrating?
Ooh, so my husband was, I swear, he might have even been more excited than I was because he's also been through this journey. Our significant others and our families also know the sacrifices. And so he was like, pack your bags. We're going to Vegas. And then after we spend a day in Vegas, we're going to San Diego. So we did a like spur of the moment, picked up and went, and it was amazing. It was just like the best feeling ever.
Fantastic. Carl, any plans? Or you're still figuring out how to celebrate?
Well, my dad is in town, so when he gets back from running around, I'm going to take me and my partner out for dinner.
Fantastic.
And make him drive so I can drink.
Yes, you need the celebratory adult
for his own
beverage.
insurance examination, so he's been stressing out about his tests. So.
Aww. Very cool.
I guess we're not allowed to bring him out with us. He needs to study, whatever.
Wait, what exam is he taking?
What are you taking?
I'm taking the Minnesota Property and Casualty licensing.
Minnesota Property and Casualty licensure examination.
Okay. Is that real estate? or something different than that. I'm like, yeah. Well, good luck to him.
Right, good luck. I can bestow upon him all the testing techniques that I've learned.
Yeah, you can help
Yes,
with the study.
yes.
I did that recently. My husband took the real estate brokerage exam, and I know like zero about real estate or being a broker, but was able to help him study. And he passed, and it felt really awesome to be of use, even though I didn't understand most of the material and the questions I was reading to him, but I was still able to help him, rule things out or like think things through. So hopefully you can be an aid to your partner as well.
I shall be.
Fantastic. Great.
Carl, did you look at materials yesterday at all, or did you put them away?
Oh, I've been going nonstop since Thursday. So Thursday was up until about 2, and then yesterday I did a whole bunch. This morning I got up at 7 and was renewing stuff, reviewing and looking at it, and then I was driving, holding my notebook, and I got the parking lot and was reviewing, and then I was reviewing, and then I said, okay, let's go and take it. I don't know how much I actually learned in the last 24 hours, but it was more reassuring than anything.
That is not what we recommend, but you passed, so we'll go with it. We'll go with it.
I took the opposite approach. I took I'm going to put everything away. What I know is what I know, and I'm not going to stress myself out. So for me, but I always went into those exams incredibly nervous and anxious. So I think for me, it was like actually good to kind of like put it away and say like, enough, like you're going to do this, but I think everybody has to kind of do it the way that they're comfortable with and like what kind of works for them,
And Carl, can we schedule you for another day to share your story with the group? Will you be our next
can, but can I have like a couple weeks off to kind of digest and process and celebrate?
November, December, whenever you're ready. Veronica also didn't come right away. It's been like I think a month or so, right?
Yeah. Mine almost actually almost a month a month and a day. So I needed those couple weeks too to just say like, oh, is this real? Can I pinch myself?
I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to do that today. Your brain has worked enough for one day. Fantastic. Any other questions or comments before I stop the recorded part? We can still stay on and chat, but wanted to figure out a good time.
I just wanted to quickly jump in and say hi. I passed. I'll be back.
Fantastic. And he'll be back. Thank you for agreeing to share and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, congratulations.
Yep.
Okay, I think I will stop the recording and then we'll circle back for those who are still on.